Shabbat Shalom. The portion this week deals with Jewish economic theory. So I thought it'd be a good idea if we understand a little bit more about economic theory in general. But let's start with this. There's a philosopher called John Rawls, and he wrote a book in 1971. The book was called A Fair and Just Society. And he uses a fascinating notion. He talked about the veil of ignorance. The veil of ignorance. If you wanted to develop a just society, you must apply the veil of ignorance. The veil of, imagine that you were standing behind a veil and you couldn't see on the other side. And you didn't know how you'd be born. You didn't know whether you'd be born rich or you'd be born poor. You didn't know whether you'd be born sickly or you'd be born healthy. You didn't know whether you would be part of the majority or part of a tiny minority. How would you like the world, the economic world, the political world around you, to be structured? I think it's one of the most profound ways of thinking about justice in the world. I don't know what it's going to be like, so I'm not going to take any chances. I want to see it's a just world. We've been going through trying to develop economic and social theories for a long time. I'm going to pick up just from the Middle Ages, because you could go back further, but the Middle Ages are most important. The Middle Ages was the time of feudalism. In feudalism, it was a social and an economic system. It was prevalent not only in Europe, in Japan, in China, and a whole lot of other places. Feudalism prevailed. Feudalism was where the king gave land to the lords. Specific families, often part of his family. And then the lords would give some land to vassals. Vassals were a little higher, a little lower than the lords, and their job was to exchange the land that they'd been given as a gift for loyalty and for promising to give soldiers to the king when he needed it. Land in those days was your money box. It was the only way you could create any wealth or any sustenance was having land that you could work and get something out of. Below, so you had the king, then you had the lords, then you had the vassals, and below that, at the bottom of the bucket, were the peasants. And they worked, and they gave the lord, their lord with a small L, they gave the lord part of their crops, often majority of their crops, just for the privilege of working his land so that they didn't die of starvation. The hierarchies were very rigid, and the power was all in the hands of the nobility. Whether you were a lord or a king, you had the power, no one else did. No, it's not unsurprising that there was very, very low economic growth during that period. Very low economic growth. And there was also very, very slow social progress. No peasant ever became a vassal, or no vassal ever became a lord, and no lord ever became king. Well, very rarely. Tiny little movements, hardly perceptible. The response to that was communism, another economic theory. The communist economic theory said, we will give everybody security and we will make all people equal. Equal in materially equal. What they did was they took the property of the wealthy and distributed among the poor. Now there is a good reason why the wealthy got wealthy and the poor remained poor, not only because they knew what to do with the land. And when they gave all the land and implements, they had to hand in the implements. And they gave all their land and spread it out freely and equally among all the population. It didn't make them richer, it made them disastrously poorer, because somebody who could till the land didn't necessarily know how to run a farm. The result of all of this was there was very, very little economic growth to speak of. There was no freedom for people because they were told what they could do by central authority. So as opposed to being suppressed by the rich person whose land you were working on, you were now being suppressed by a government who was supposed to be looking after your interests and did not. And power was now concentrated. Power to the people? Yes, I know. Power to the people was concentrated in the people who were running the people. It was inefficient. There was no incentive for anybody to get rich, to make money, or to try and do better. And there was very, very low productivity and very, very slow economic growth. And needless to say, it failed. And then came along capitalism. Capitalism has historically generated more wealth than any other economic system known to mankind. Extraordinary what happened in capitalist countries compared to feudal societies or compared to communism. GDP went high. Technological innovation soared. There was enormous improvements in living standards. People like Milton Friedman, who was a very well-known, I'm skipping a lot of economists, but Milton Friedman, who was a very, very well-known and very important and influential political theorist, economic theorist, he said we must have minimal government. We don't want intervention by government like they have in the communists, where they knew everything about you and everything you did had to be approved. There should be minimal government. It should be left to people alone to get the markets to work. Because if you don't want to buy from that store because it's too expensive, you won't. And if they don't want to drop their prices, that's their business. If they find somebody else, that's just fine. So markets, he said, will regulate themselves. Adam Smith said something like this a little early on as well, but not exactly the same. And the result of this, he said, it'll lead to better economic outcomes. So he was very serious about governments getting out of the way. The Communist Party was absolutely in your way all the time. The opposite of that, the capitalist government must be out of your way as much as possible. There must be deregulation, and he said lower and lower taxes. Why should there be lower taxes? Because I earned my wealth. Why would you want to take away my freedom and tell me what I can spend my money on? It's my money. I made it. Ronald Reagan was a great, Thatcher as well, was a great exponent of Milton Friedman's ideas. And he said, government isn't the solution to our problems. Government is our problem. And he said that the most scary words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. And he said that what we've got to do is we've got to limit government and create free markets. And that will improve the quality of people's lives, it'll improve wealth, it'll improve everything. But here's the downside. The richest 1% of human beings on planet Earth own more wealth than the bottom 95% put together. 95% are worth what the top 1% are worth. The top 1% control 43% of global financial assets. That is scary. A tiny group of people, top 1%, have got the real wealth. They control 43% of all the assets of the world. That can't make sense. That can't be right. If you were behind the veil of ignorance, would you go for an economic system that looks like that? That's scary. On the one hand, we know that capitalism has generated more wealth than anyone else. It spurred innovation. It allows people to move and do things. It gives them the freedom to do things. But it's severely flawed. There's a book by probably one of the most serious economists in the world today. His name is Joseph Stiglitz. If you get a chance, read his book. The book is called The Road to Freedom. And what Stiglitz says is that he calls it the road to freedom, which is important. It's an economic book, but it's the road to freedom. Because economics should not only make people rich, it should make them free. The idea of being a slave is either to the job that you have. It's very easy to enslave people in jobs, by the way. I'll just give you one hint of what I'm talking about. There's a thing called a variable time employee, used in service industries like supermarkets. Variable time employee goes like this. You want a job. I'm desperate for a job. I have kids. Very good. We can offer you a job Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Fantastic. At least I'm working 3 days a week. But if you're a variable time employee, I don't have to stick to Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Next week, we're only going to employ you on Thursday and Friday. The week after, it's Sunday and Tuesday. What that means is I'm enslaved. I can't get another job anywhere else. If I go and apply for other jobs, I'll lose the bit of jobs that I've got from you. When you have power, you can do most incredible things, and while the supermarket might be making beautiful profits, you're suffering. So amidst enormous wealth, there's a lot of inequalities that happen because of economic structures. And what Stiglitz is talking about in his book, he is saying that you can't deprive the rich of their wealth through taxes. That's taking away their freedom. We need freedom. I think Isaiah Berlin said it best, the Oxford philosopher. He said, freedom for the wolves generally means death for the lambs. So how do we balance these freedoms? How do we keep all this stuff together? And Stiglitz's book, by the way, just to give you a sense of who Stiglitz is, he was Clinton's economic advisor, head of his economic. He also was the head of the World Bank, vice president of the World Bank, so he has some ideas about economics. He also won a Nobel Prize for his economic theory, and he's taught at all the top universities. I've got 3, but all top universities. An extraordinary thinker. And his ideas, he calls his progressive capitalism. What happens in progressive capitalism, he says that you have to have government. Government must control things. Free markets are not free for everyone. They're just free for some people. He said governments have got to ensure fair competition. Governments must ensure that people who can't afford healthcare get proper healthcare. Governments must ensure that people who can't afford private education can get good education. Governments must intervene and take taxes from people who've got it and ensure that society does that and does the right things. He also pushed for labor unions. He said we need labor unions because the variable time employee can do nothing. The labor union, when it represents 1,000 people, they can do something. They have power. Otherwise, there's asymmetric power. The owner has all the power, and the people below him don't. He talked about having co-ops. Co-ops are where they're businesses that are owned by the people who shop there or who work there. So you have cooperative banks where everybody gets dividends from the bank, but they get dividends because they use the bank all the time. So they own the bank. And during the Depression, by the way, in America, or the recession, the banks that did best weren't the banks that had to be bailed out by the government. They were cooperative banks. In addition to that, we need civil organizations. Civil organizations that will hold the government to account, that will hold corporations to account, that will hold societies to account. And also he talked about having non-profit organizations, like our synagogue, an NPO, non-profit organization. And he's got a model of how this can work economically. This morning we're going to read what the Torah says. The Torah starts off, when they talk about economics, they use the words li kol haaretz, which is mine is the earth. And all the rights that you have and freedoms that you have afterwards are not because you voted in the right government, as opposed to the wrong one. Not that you voted in the right government. It's not relevant who the government is. Not at all. Li kol haaretz, I own earth. Earth is the basic source of our wealth and the basic source of our ability to make any money ever. So how does the Torah decide how this whole thing is going to work? When the people entered the land of Egypt, the land was divided up among the tribes. All tribes were given land. In tribes, all families were given land. Which meant that everybody had some means of earning from their land. Now, that's fantastic. I mean, we all earn, we can all be rich. No, it doesn't actually work like that because there are some businessmen who are better businessmen, some farmers who are better farmers, than others. And they estimate that about 90% of all startups in the world end in disaster in 2 years. And you can imagine some really good, committed person, and he just makes basic mistakes with his farm. And now he has no money. So eventually he has to sell the farm. And some guy's got a bit of money, buys his farm. And now he's lost his means of production. And he hasn't got much. Eventually he starts selling himself. He sells himself as a slave. Because at least if I'm a slave, I will get food, I'll get a place to sleep, and I'll get some food for my family and a place to sleep for them as well. I'll sell myself as a slave. And they will be allowed to. But the Torah makes a distinction. It says you can sell yourself as a slave if you have to, if you're in penury and you owe people money and you can't do without it. However, nobody can be a slave for longer than 6 years. In the 7th year, all slaves are set free. That's it. No discussion. Nobody can be a slave longer than 6 years. 6 years, 7th year, everybody gets free. And now that you're freed from slavery, you can go out and earn a decent living at a decent price. And you weren't paid for. In America, female slaves were actually more prized than male slaves because they had offspring, and the offspring was owned by the owner. Nothing like that in Judaism. 7 years, 6 years, and the slave is gone. The other thing which was really interesting is that after 7 cycles, 7 years, every year the land had to lie fallow. You were not allowed to plow or sow or do anything on your lands in the 7th year. Bear that in mind for a moment. After 7 sevens, the 7th year of the 7th time, also land lies fallow. But something else happens. The land returns to its original owner. The land that I had from my great-grandfather, father, which was given to him when years ago, I get back. That's like being given back the share portfolio, exactly as it was. I'm given back the factory, I'm given back the shop, working. I get, in the 50th year, we get the stuff back. What does that mean? We all understand why intergenerational wealth can often be a good idea. I was going to say always is. Can often be a good idea. You had a rich dad, that's very useful because it allows you to go to university, it allows you to start, it's nice. Of course, if your rich dad was Bill Gates, what did his children do to deserve to be billionaires when they're born? Intergenerational wealth has problems of its own. But let's get back to this. Every 50th year, the family gets back again, have another start. We now have our own factory back again, and we can plant our lands. And the cycle goes back again and starts again. The 7th year, the land is left fallow. You can't work the land. What's that about? What do you mean I can't work? I own it. These people need jobs. Sorry, mate. You're not allowed to work the land. What's that about? It gives you a very strong message. Li kol haaretz. I, the Lord, own all this land. You don't. Remind yourself in the 7th year. In the 7th year, you've either saved up enough from the other years, or you will starve, or you can eat what's lying around, but you can't work the lands. You can eat what's saved and what's lying around. But it does remind you very, very physically and very strongly, I own the land. Why that's important is an economic system. This idea of the Jubilee, you've heard of Jubilee Bell, and the Jubilee debt relief, it's all named after this stuff. Jubilee year was the 50th year, and in that year the land returns to its people. The idea of land returning to its people is not because you voted in the right government. The land returns to its people because God said so. And that's the big difference. We're going to read the Torah now, and you can see this particular passage is in the Torah that we're going to be reading. We now turn to page